Today it's my pleasure to welcome a friend of mine and a long-term resident of San Miguel, April Gaydos, president of Audubon, Mexico. April moved to San Miguel in 2010 and immediately joined the board of Audubon, or within a couple of weeks, right? Yes. She couldn't wait to get on the board. She has served as president since 2014. April brings her background in community development, environmental communication, and education to the Audubon. Before moving to San Miguel, April lived in Palm Springs, California, where she served on the Sustainability Commission and as president of her neighborhood organization. These experiences helped her understand the importance of citizen involvement in the community, what power that brings. April, welcome back. And please talk to us or bring us up to date on the crisis in the Presa. Thank you.
So nice to be here, and thank you for having me so I can share this really important story about what's going on with our Presa and our overall water quality. We can start. So I call this talk Water Hyacinth Invasion, the Presa Allende, a symptom of neglect. And I'm hoping to tell that story because, or get that really clear, is that this is a very, very serious problem. It is very difficult to eradicate the water hyacinth once it gets established. And it really is because we've been very neglectful of our water resources. Thank you. I want to say too is that this isn't my project or me just doing this. We have a group of people that have taken upon ourselves to come together and try to find pathways through this problem. So I'm just happen to be a representative of the one. I'm not the leader exactly. So when I was here in January, this is pretty much where we left off. I was talking about our watershed and the health of our watershed, and that the Lirio and the Presa is a symptom of all the things that we're not doing right in our watershed to manage our water quality. And at the time, there was a coverage about 30% of water hyacinth covering the water in the Presa. So I just want to go really quickly back through just some sort of basic watershed stuff so it provides context to this talk. This is our watershed. It captures all of the rainfall that enters into this basin, basically, and all the water travels across the land, down the mountains, through streams, and ends up in the Rio Laja, and then ultimately the Presa Allende. Next slide, please. And after it's released at the dam, the Rio Laja continues to a point below Celaya where it enters the Lerma River. And that river then flows all the way to Lake Chapala and services something like 3 million people with household and commercial water. And all along the way, it's used for agriculture, industry, all the uses that we have for water. And it's also, we're part of this Lerma Chapala watershed. It is one of the most polluted watersheds in Mexico. So that just gives you a little bit of context to the importance of watershed health. So next slide, please. In the 1964, I guess it was, a dam was built at the point where the Rio Laja cascades down into a very deep, beautiful canyon. And the purpose of damming up the river was for agricultural reservoir. So this water is intended and the rights belong to the agricultural interests downstream, and then anything left over continues to flow on down to maybe even a drop of water here ends up in the Pacific Ocean. I'm not sure. But, click please. So it created this incredible asset for our region, even though that technically this is not our water. There's many people that do use the water for agriculture and for other things, but it was an unintended consequence of something that was a practical decision to hold water for the agriculture interests and to help prevent flooding as well. Next slide. So when the dam was built, a lot of different values emerged, and one of them was a fishing industry that I'm not sure, 140 families, I think, are dependent on the fishing industry in San Miguel. The federal government provided them with boats and all the gear that they needed. They trained, and they also stocked the Presa with fish. This was a big shift for these people, and this happened about 60 years ago, and now they're really a proud community of fishermen who are very affected by this Lirio problem. Next slide, please. And it also became a habitat for wildlife, especially birds, both native and migratory. We have the great American pelican that lives in the Presa, a year-round population now, because there's plenty of food and because of the reservoir conditions. We have ducks and wading birds and shorebirds and all kinds of birds. And I can't impress upon enough how important wetlands and these kinds of environments are to our bird population. And they're dwindling all across our continent and probably, I could say, around the world. So preserving and protecting this water, this treasure that we have in our community, is not only good for people, but it's good for birds, and we like to say what's good for birds is good for people. Next slide, please. And it's also become a recreational resource. I don't know what happened to the bottom of that slide. It's probably because it's, but those hats are connected to a kayak below them. And those are roseate spoonbills up in the trees, and they are incredibly beautiful, like pink flamingos, only different species. So people, next slide, are kayaking, they're sailing, they're paddleboarding, they're sculling, they're doing all kinds of great things on the Presa. And this is a riparian area that when the water level is really low, is a great place to take a walk along the river. But when the water's high, these trees become part of the lake system. So we can kayak up through the trees with the birds and be in the shade. It's really a beautiful experience. Next slide, please. So I like to call what happened in the fall, I guess, or late summer of 2021 is the perfect storm. We didn't have any idea that there was this problem that was just looming with the Lirio. This picture, I think, was taken last winter. But 20 years ago, we learned there had been an infestation of Lirio in the Presa. I'm sorry if I go back and forth between Water Hyacinth and Lirio Acuatico. The local name is Lirio Acuatico. Thank you. And the infestation that took place 20 years ago was not as significant as the one that we're experiencing today. And the fishermen went out to work because they couldn't get out with their boats to go fishing, so they manually extracting the Lirio from the water. And also, rumor has it, I can't read my notes. Rumor has it that also chemicals were used to eradicate the Lirio. But it really wasn't eradicated. The plant life left. But what happened was I think, next slide, please. Yeah, okay. Ah, you're great. Thank you so much. And I'm not sure I'm coming through on the Zoom. Okay, great idea. Okay, all right, thank you. So, just when I was getting to the meaty part, in 2021, Well, actually, 2020. We'd had a really bad flood in about, I think it was 2018, where the Toyota factory in Celaya was completely ruined and a lot of damage was done. The next couple of years, they started letting out a lot of water out through the dam to prevent that from happening again. But we didn't get the summer rains to replenish the water. So we had 2 years of like pretty much summer drought, and the water level was down to 17% of the capacity of the Presa by like May of 2021. And then in August, we got a little bit of rain, July and August a little bit. And what we didn't realize is that infestation of 20 years ago had deposited a lot of seeds in the sediments. And when these sediments were revealed, the seeds were revealed, and the bits of water that were coming down were helping to germinate these seeds. And then in September, when we got the torrential rains, the water level started rising very rapidly, and it created the perfect condition for the Lirio to just explode. Next slide, please. So this is the, just an example of, that's where we were probably in May of 20, we're cutting off the top, but that's okay. July of 2021, where the water was really low, and then this was just a few days ago. And now it's surrounded by Lirio. The water is receding because they are letting a lot of water out of the dam, and we haven't received a lot of rainfall. Next slide, please. That church is down towards the dam. This is the north end. This is September of 2021. Next slide, please. May of 2022. Next slide, please. And now the Lirio is not only in the Presa, but it extends all throughout the Rio Laja. And we know it's up to Dolores, and we just haven't explored above Dolores. Next slide, please. So I've given you a little bit of information, but I want to talk about how did we get here. This is an image of from June of 22, when in January, I think we're at 30% coverage of the Presa, and we're now at 50% coverage. So to answer the question of how we got here, we need to understand this plant a little more. Next slide, please. This is one of the smartest plants on Earth, I think. And I think all plants are very intelligent. But this plant has created strategies for survival that cannot be denied. And it's learning to, it knows how to dominate its environment and survive under the least amicable conditions. It has sponge-like structures that keep it afloat, and its roots absorb the nutrients under the water. Also, it has cup-shaped leaves that catch the wind, so it moves around very rapidly. And the roots extend sometimes to probably around 2 or 3 feet below the water surface, and those roots become entangled, and they create this large mat. So we have basically these rafts of hyacinth moving around the Presa at all times. So on some days you can look out and see that it looks like the water's pretty clear, but it's all moved down to one end or another. So it makes it very difficult to predict where it's going to be. If you set up a day for extraction, say, you might show up and there's no Lirio there because it's all moved downstream or upstream. It's native to South America. Next slide, please. And it was introduced to Mexico and around the world because it's a very attractive plant. And it's useful addition to ponds because it has a very good quality about it, and that is that it extracts nutrients or pollutants from water. So if you put it into a pond, it would help to keep the pond water clean. But it's very difficult to keep it in the pond, and we think that that's probably how this all started in the very first place, was that people were bringing it in, putting it in their ponds, and the seeds escaped, and then it ended up, excuse me, in our water bodies. It is now considered to be one of the world's most noxious weeds. It affects mostly in the southern latitude, but huge bodies of water all throughout Asia, India, well, Southeast Asia, Africa, South America, and now here in Mexico. When here, we heard that there was like 17 other reservoirs in Mexico that were equally affected by Lirio. So we're not the only ones grappling with this problem. So what is the definition of a weed? Abundant seed production. Each flower from the water hyacinth can produce up to 5,000 seeds. Long-term survival of buried seeds, well, there we go. It's 20 years. And that's about what they say that they think the limit is. So we were just like, it was a perfect storm. Sorry. It has a rapid population establishment. Not only is it able to reproduce by seed, but it can vegetatively reproduce. So what it does is that it germinates from the seed. Once it's out floating in the water, then it starts producing daughter plants. And then these daughter plants, and each plant can produce up to 6 daughter plants. These break off and create their own colonies of plants. And the daughter plants can start reproducing within 5 to 15 days, and they think that the plants themselves, I mean, if you have 30% and the plants are right, you can double in mass every 5 to 15 days. That's why this is so dangerous and how it has grown so quickly to compromise our presa. Its adaptation for spreading, the daughter plants that I mentioned, they are quickly reproduce and they break away and create their own colonies. And the ability to occupy sites to stir activities. So in this case, we're talking about human activities such as intentionally dumping our wastewater into the Presa Allende untreated. This is the primary nutrient that is allowing this plant to survive. Also, fertilizer runoff, animal manure, those are the main culprits for feeding this Lirio. And we can tell it's being successful because it's receiving a lot of nutrients. In San Miguel, we did a study in 2014 that resulted in a prediction that only about at that point in time, 2014, were we able to treat less than 50% of the wastewater that was entering our sewage treatment plant. Now people are saying that it's probably around 80% untreated sewage that's going into the Presa directly by San Miguel Viejo, by the way. And then those folks are using that water to irrigate their crops. Next slide I forgot to tell you. I was just going back to the watershed to talk about the inputs. And, forward, please, advance. And one more time. So, right, perfect. So what are the threats? Well, first of all, we have these fishing families who adapted many years ago to this new industry, who are now have their livelihoods threatened because they cannot get out. And unfortunately, one of the major fishing villages is in an area where the Lirio tends to collect. So they cannot row their boats through this stuff. They don't have motorized boats, by the way. They're all rowing. And they do net fishing. So they get out, then they put their nets out, and when they come back, the Lirios moved into the area where their nets are. So now they don't even know where the nets are, and they can't get to them, and it's just very, very difficult for them. What's happening, too, is the Lirio is taking oxygen out of the water. So this highly affects invertebrates, all the aquatic life. And then that goes up the food chain to the birds and to the mammals and on and on and on. So effectively, we're creating a dead environment if this is not contained to the point where there's enough oxygen to support life. And I asked one of the fishermen the other day how the fishing was when they've been able to get out a couple of days recently. And he said it's not as good as usual. So I don't, that's not any scientific data, but it's we're going to watch that to see how the fish population. A lot of the fish actually come down from the river now. And since that's affected as well, it's likely that the fish could be compromised. It's a breeding ground for mosquitoes. I live very near the Presa. We have had nonstop mosquito population since the fall. And usually we only have summertime mosquitoes. And mosquitoes are vectors. They're spreaders of vectors. So there's a human health threat there. And plus, they're just been annoying, right? They make your life miserable. It impedes recreational boating and the aesthetic enjoyment of the Presa. Our kayakers have to figure out where to go to launch their boats. They're doing okay with it, but they've cut back on a lot of programs because it's just too difficult. And it's really to remove. The plants are 95% water. They're really, really heavy. So it's, and they're all entangled, so it's very intensive to remove them. And because they shift around with the wind so much, it's difficult to find it sometimes or be prepared for it. And along the shore, it is easier to extract, but when it's out in the middle, there's just no way. And it has a rapid rate of reproduction, able to double in mass every 5 to 15 days. And we've seen it grow from 30% to 50% in just a matter of a short months during the winter, when it was blooming, which is the times when it's not reproducing as quickly. And the biggest threat probably is there's no permanent solution. I just explained to you about the seeds of the sediment. So even if we were able to take out every bit of leaf that we saw, every plant, it's lying in wait. Now, and then we have to make sure, if we ever get to that point, that we, on top of this, that the people that come after us know what's going on so they can be prepared. Okay. So I referred to the fact that the water in the Presa does not belong to San Miguel or our municipality. So whose water is it? Next slide, please. Click. Conagua is the water agency that has been authorized with the responsibility of managing our surface waters. So they're the ones that were able to give permits. They're the ones that make sure that municipalities are not discharging untreated sewage. They're the ones that are responsible for upholding our environmental laws as it relates to water. And our nation's law says that all our surface waters are the nation's water. Water for people and water for natural systems. And that is supposed to be held in balance with the needs of commercial or industrial uses. Just a click. Our municipal government and SEPASMA are responsible because we are discharging wastewater into the stream and the Presa. So we have a responsibility in that way, and we also have a responsibility to uphold environmental laws to protect our water. And the Secretary of the Environment at the state level is also, they are the holder of a lot of the purse strings, and they are the ones that could do some work to assemble the municipalities, which there are 9 different municipalities in our watershed, to create ways of managing our water much better. Next slide, please. So what is government doing? Not very much. And it's our local government that has done anything meaningful, and it's just a drop in the bucket. Is this better? Is this on? Pardon? Oh, that's for Zoom. Oh, well, I'm sorry. I would have spoke up. I thought, okay, I'll do that better. So what the municipal government has been doing is they've hired this extraction machine for, I think it was for 9 months. It's working near the dam, and it is chugging along, but it's not very fast, and it can't outcompete the growth of the Lirio, but at least it's something. And I think that's what the plan of us was the government, is that we have to show that we're doing something. So they made the commitment to this. And now they're taking that Lirio and they're turning it into compost. And they're using that compost as they go out and reforest different areas of the municipality, which could also help with water quality. So it's all interconnected. Had some good actions, it's just not enough. Conagua, they came out with a letter several months ago, said they're coming in, they're gonna, well, first of all, they told our municipal government that they couldn't do anything, didn't have any money. So sorry. And now they say they're gonna come in and help with containment, which would be great because it can't grow as fast if we can keep it contained. And they're also, we've heard, are coming with trucks to help move some of the Lirio that's sitting on the shoreline that our fishermen have removed, and moving it up higher on to higher ground. And I'll get into that a little bit later. State is doing nothing. There is a reservoir in southern Guanajuato that has been grappling with this problem for 15 years. The state has helped them by providing 2 of these extraction machines and some other support, I'm sure, because it is a protected natural area. And several years ago, there was a movement here, and we came this close, if anybody can see this, to approval of a protected natural area that extended from the Picachos down through the corridor that runs through El Charco, the Cachiches Creek that ends up in the Presa, and all around the Presa. It was intended to preserve the quality of the water for people and wildlife, but not to impinge economic development. But that's how it was construed by the people that own property around the Presa, and they put the kibosh on it. So it needs to be revisited. Next slide, please. So community action, that's where I come in, and the people that I'm working with. And we started noticing this problem because our Amigos folks were out kayaking every week. And in about August, they started seeing this Lirio show up. But it wasn't anything much. And then by October, it was like, wow, this is big. And we had started looking into this. What is happening? What is this plant all about? And when we found out how fast it grew and how much of a problem it was around the world, we got very nervous. But going back to the idea of a perfect storm, this was also the time when the government was changing administration. And when the government that was in place closes, they're preparing to hand over the reins to the incoming administration, and basically everything shuts down. So there was no one to talk to. And we didn't know who was coming in the Medio Ambiente department to talk with. So it wasn't until the new administration came in that we learned who was working at ecology. I'll call it because easier to say. And it wasn't until December that we got a meeting with anyone. And then it wasn't until January that we met with the director. By that time, and even before they were seated in place, they had been working. They'd seen what was going on and were trying to figure out what was going on, what to do about it. And I really appreciate the thinking and the efforts that the director has put forward on this. But I think his hands are tied. There's just not enough money, and there's not enough political will to do what needs to be done. So basically, he's doing what he can. And he told me, that the extraction machine was maybe not the best decision, but it was a sound decision, and it's at least doing something. So we decided, because we couldn't get a meeting and we were just like, what's going to happen here? We decided to pull together a group of people to see what we could learn and what maybe we could do to help, because we knew this was going to be an all hands on deck situation. So how can we be of service? And so the first thing we did was that we developed a relationship with a biologist who's worked with this problem and other water quality issues in lake environments and wetlands. And we had a community forum online, and we learned a lot through this. And he has been a good mentor to us since that time. This was in January. He told us he thought we had about 3 years to get this thing under control, or we'll lose the lake. So we're on a timeline. And we also have to factor in that we also have other ecological issues going on, like climate change, which is going to exacerbate this problem. Drought, then torrential rains, all those perfect storms that continue to feed the seed production and germination. So also what this biologist told us, and we'd heard this from others too, was we have to think differently about this infestation. We have to think of it, instead of a plague, as an opportunity, because the Lirio has value in the fact that it does have water cleansing properties, and also the material, once it's extracted, can be used for other purposes. So we've been grappling with what is the right thing for the people that live here to provide the incentive that they can go out, collect the Lirio, and either it's going to improve their lives or it's going to be an economic opportunity for them. Next slide, please. So I made this little diagram up, and I'm not going to go over the whole thing, but basically it was just a way to look at, if we do a biological control, which is what the local government is saying is the best thing to do. You bring in, it's either a fungus or an insect that will infect the plant and cause it to die. That plant material still has to be extracted, the dead material in the water. If you just focus on extraction, and then you have manual and machine extraction, you get to the same place. Somewhere, now you've got to figure out what to do with this material that you've taken out of the presa. And so we looked at different levels of opportunity. Next slide, please. We've held community extraction days. This is when the fishermen come out to work side by side with community volunteers. It's hard work, but it's also rewarding and kind of fun to be playing in the water. We also raised money to support the fishermen to continue extracting, either up on the north end where this is, or down outside of their community. And they also volunteer their time. 10 minutes? Okay. Next slide, please. A weed is a plant whose virtue has not yet been discovered. Ralph Waldo Emerson. So that's what we have to kind of think about here. And so we've been looking at different industries, like the brickmakers live on the presa, right next door to the fishermen. They're kind of actually integrated. And so what we were looking at here is, could we create a compressed block that could be used to fuel the brick ovens? And so we were trying to compress it and see what was going on, and you'll see in a later slide, the goat liked it, but it didn't work. That experiment didn't work too well, but we're still working on that as a viable alternative to wood and sawdust, and also cutting our trees to fuel the brick ovens. Next slide, please. There is a company in San Luis Potosí who makes products from dried Lirio, it's very absorbent, so they make these big absorbent bumper things, and it's for when there's oil spills or chemical spills in industrial settings, or I guess probably even in water. They'll pay the fishermen for extracting, grinding, and drying the Lirio, and then bagging it up, and then they'll come and get it. But it's a very precise process. Right now, we just don't think we're prepared to take it on, and it takes some expensive equipment for grinding and supervision, and it's complex. So it's still sort of simmering there on the burner. Next slide, please. The other, I think, really, really valuable use for this is compost. We have arid lands here that are subject to desertification. If we don't start regenerating our soils, we're going to be in additional trouble. We already are. We just need, and people are working on this. But if we can find really great nutrients to help improve the soil quality and then also to absorb water, to hold water in the soil, this would be perfect. So we're looking at this on different scales. We've just assembling a compost committee, and it took us a while to get to this because we had the plant material tested for heavy metals, because it was like, okay, we're not going to make compost and find out that it's deadly. And their first charge, we had it tested, it showed high in arsenic, but now we don't know if that level of arsenic is actually going to be a threat to human or animal health. So one of the charges of this compost team that's being assembled right now is to find out the answer to that question, and then find out on different scales, how can we roll out composting programs in communities where they are encouraged to go and collect the Lirio on their own and create their own home compost, and can we do it at a commercial level so that we can have the fishermen or other communities can create compost for sale. Here's so next slide, please. So this was our brick, our fuel brick, and the goat loved it, or sheep, I'm sorry. I keep calling him a goat. He's very upset. So again, we need to find out about the arsenic in the Lirio before we start promoting it as livestock feed. Next slide, please. We're experimenting with the brick makers to actually use the Lirio as a filler in the bricks. I think they use sawdust and something else now. And so they found that it's working. So now we can have green bricks, and or sort of green bricks. And so that's moving along, as well as finding it, how to make it as an alternative fuel for ovens. Next slide. And another opportunity is biogas. This is Uriria, which, as I mentioned, is the place in the reservoir in the southern part of Guanajuato. And Santiago here is working with individuals and commercial enterprises to build these biogas facilities that are operated on dried Lirio. And so all you do is you get a bag of dried Lirio, you put it into the chamber there in the front, you add water, and then it goes into that, what they call a bladder, and this biogas is created as the Lirio is broken down by the microorganisms. And now Santiago is experimenting with a facility that's large enough to serve like 10 families, I think. So we're trying to figure out how that would all work, and if we can then implement some model projects to try to get this, it'd be a cultural shift for people. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done in community development and support and that kind of thing, but what a great way to be able to reduce, it's way less polluting than propane, and it's a free source of fuel. Next slide, please. So this is how really we could end this problem or eliminate the degree of infestation that we have now, and that is to eliminate its food source. And I'm talking about our wastewater primarily, and also, next slide, please. The manure that comes into the waters from livestock grazing and drinking, and also the overuse of fertilizers, chemical fertilizers that are entering into our waterways, the residue. And so if we can shift people to compost, and we have this great compost resource, we don't need chemical fertilizers. The cows and the goats, the sheep, that's another story. But the big culprit is what's coming out of that pipe. Next slide, please. So what's it going to take to get that happen? It's going to take political will. It's going to take a lot of money, but the money won't come without the political will. And so what we're doing now is we're creating a citizens campaign that is an outreach effort to inform more people about what's going on and what the solutions and the problems are, the threats, and requesting their engagement, writing letters, doing whatever we can to put pressure on the government to say, this is important to us, it's important to our quality of life, and we want you to take action. Next slide, please. This is a quote from someone you know. I loved it when he said this. I hate dilemmas, persist. And that's what we're doing. And we haven't come up with the absolute everything, but I think we have a lot of things in our basket. And I think that if we can get a movement going, that is going to prove to be what is needed to resolve the problem in the Presa. Next slide, please. And that's our website address. If anyone is interested in donating to the Lirio Fund, audubondemexico.org, please. Thank you. Yeah.
So we have time for like one or two questions. Gary?
Has the tree been often being sucked out of the water by the water hyacinth? If this problem is not corrected, any projections on the lake will be dead.
No, the biologist told us that 3 years is our window.
3 years?
But, you know,
Because if you look around the world, this is not unusual. One of the bodies of water goes dead.
you think,
Trying to get it back is always impossible.
well, so what are we going to do? We're going to do everything we can.
Chihuahua, we had also a reservoir full of lirio, and they gave this lirio to the cows and big animals that there are many in Chihuahua, and they almost finished the lirio problem in Delicia, Chihuahua, where the reservoir was.
Wow, that's cool. It's, yeah.
Has there been any interest in, from a private company that willing to get in there and harvest it on an industrial scale and be able to process and sell the mulch?
No. And that's one of the points that the director of ecology had, was that, you know, if this was so valuable, there would be people out here like taking advantage of it. It's small scale right now. I don't know if it'll grow to a larger scale, but if we can keep keep it localized, then we're benefiting our own economy and not, like we send our vegetables to the United States and our water too. You know, let's see if we can keep it here and do the cottage industries that are likely. One thing I forgot to mention is the Department of Economic Development here is doing some training workshops for making artisanal products from the Lirio. It'll be interesting to watch that. But really big efforts, and I think compost is the biggest thing that we can do. All the questions? All right, thank you so much.